Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. If you haven't been here before, my name is Julie. I mostly make videos about topics such as music, makeup, as well as mental health. And if you're curious, my pronouns are they/them. Today's video is just impromptu on my webcam and something that I want to talk about sort of off the cuff, but I think it's an important concept. And that is mental health related, and that is about therapy. This is a very general, open-ended question. What is therapy? What is the purpose of therapy? Now, we could take like 50 people and do a research study and like get a poll and see what everyone thinks. And I think we would get so many different answers because good therapy, in my opinion, at least, is tailored to the needs of the individual. And because we're all individuals, we have differing needs in therapy. We have different diagnoses, if that's something that's important to you in therapy. We might be marginalized in different ways, and that might, of course, affect our therapeutic work and needs. Everybody is different. However, I think with the general public, and even people who've been to therapy who might not know a lot about it from the side of being a clinician, like I do. If you're new here, I am a former clinician of a year and a half and a client of therapy for many, many years, since I was like 9 years old on and off, and I'm 31. A lot of people in the outside world think that therapy is this magical cure, that it's not. And the issue with the way that therapy is perceived in the media and by people who don't have a lot of experience with it is that it puts a lot of pressure on clients and clinicians. So it puts pressure on a client that like, oh, they've been in therapy for 6 months, so they shouldn't have depression anymore and they should be perfect in coping. Well, we're human beings and we're not going to be perfect. And a lot of the research actually says that most people do require long-term therapy. Of course, that's a personal decision. Finances are involved, so there's a lot of privilege and accessibility, etc. with that. It's a lot of pressure on a client to say, oh, if they're in therapy for this amount of time, they should be here. And then that doesn't really focus on the individual and their needs, and that's not really compassionate. Then we're quantifying an individual, which sure, we have research studies that do that, but at the end of the day, that's not exactly how therapy works. Now, when it comes to clinicians are not magicians. I used to say this to clients in intake all the time, that I do not have a magic wand to put your symptoms into remission and you're going to be walking around PTSD and anxiety free, or, whatever you deal with. It's hard because if you read online about therapy, I think there's even like posts and websites that do talk about full remission. And maybe there are therapists out there who have that magic wand. I can't speak for everyone in this field because there's so much out there. But I think for me and my background, if you are curious, my main clientele were a lot like me. So I am autistic, I am non-binary, I am bi, queer, whatever you want to label me as. I am very LGBT. I am very neurodivergent. That gave me a strong interest in neurodivergent affirming care. And I can make a whole separate video about what that is and what that means. I didn't take a training. I just lived it every day of my life, and I had clients who had similar marginalized identities to me. And I realized that they needed a warm and compassionate approach. And of course, you would expect that from most therapists, but affirming care is sort of a different perspective of how you work with neurodivergent people. I think affirming care is important no matter what your identity or needs are. The purpose of therapy, especially for marginalized people and neurodivergent people, is not to fully feel better all the time. As human beings, we have stress, we have triggers, we have systemic problems in this world that aren't going to go away. I wish they would, but they're not going to yet. And that's hard to accept and not fair. However, we go to therapy to accept and cope with our difficulties. Again, I'm prefacing this is my opinion from my time in therapy, both as client and clinician, and this is also something I talked about in intake. It's really hard when you can't accept the difficulties that you have. And of course, that's not on the individual. There's a lot of reasons why we might struggle to accept our mental health difficulties or marginalized identity or neurodivergence, whatever it is, because there's a lot of systemic and external pressures and factors that shame us for being different or having needs or being marginalized. That is a huge focus of my therapeutic work, taking the blame off the individual. It's not just your fault. I'm sure a lot of people told you that. I'm sure a lot of forces made you feel that way. And at the end of the day, therapy is about unlearning some core beliefs that you might have. And that's not even CBT based, where we change your neural pathways. Sometimes it's about, okay, you've developed this narrative about yourself and we're going to help you to change the narrative. And that can take a long time. That isn't just about challenging and reframing thoughts like CBT says, right? That might be about really digging into your difficulties and having some in-depth conversations about them. So I think I talked a lot about what isn't the purpose of therapy. And I'm going to talk about what inspired this video. I have mental health problems. I struggle a lot, as everyone here might know. I had a bit of an outburst earlier this week that I was not proud of, but it was a trauma response. And it was in regard to something that happened with my neighbor. And my neighbor was not happy about it. And I had my earplugs in and didn't hear anything they said, but they said some very nasty things to my mom. And they layered it with, get help. They need to get help. First of all, I am getting help. But second of all, it's really harmful when we say that. And even people who mean well say that. So I don't want to shame anyone for saying that, because there are people who mean well when they're like, oh, maybe you can get some help. I think tone, body language, and context are important in that conversation. The way this person was saying it was, this person needs to mask and not show any sign of mental health difficulties to be deserving of leaving their house and being anywhere near me in my neighborhood. That's not okay. And I'm in therapy. I've been in therapy consistently for a few months now, and my therapist is a wonderful trauma specialist, and I'm very lucky to have her. But my PTSD isn't just going to go away. I'm learning how to accept and cope with it and be nicer to myself and have compassion for people in the world. I'm doing the things that are the purpose of therapy. I'm gradually chipping away at all the complexities around my struggles and identity and difficulties, as most people would in therapy. But I'm not going to have overnight changes. The goal of therapy isn't that you will never get triggered again. You'll never get stressed out again. You'll never have a trauma response ever again. The goal of therapy is you're going to understand more of why, like why does that trigger me and why do I respond that way? And that can be really helpful, especially because there's a lot out there about nervous systems and how our nervous system responds, which is our body, right? So it's not always like, I'm intentionally responding this way, and then we have to feel ashamed. Like, our body is responding in a certain way to protect us. And yeah, it sucks because society says that's not okay, and that's wrong. But that's not entirely fair to marginalized and neurodivergent people. And even human beings who don't have significant mental health problems struggle and react and are impulsive sometimes. As human beings, that's why we're human beings. we have emotions. We act on our emotions sometimes, and we have to hold space for that and not try to be perfect or always try to mask our difficulties with neurodivergence, mental health, etc. I'm making this video because even though this person was, fairly hostile toward me and my family, and I've dealt with that plenty before, I'm sure other people have dealt with that kind of ableism. And I want you to understand that therapy is about building a safe and comfortable relationship with your mental health provider, feeling like you can tell them whatever you need to without being judged, and that they hold the same compassion for you that they're going to teach you to hold for yourself, right? There's so much different types of therapies out there and lots of different skills, but at the core of therapy, it's a relationship with another human being that wants you to be more of who you are, to be affirmed in who you are, to be compassionate toward who you are, and set goals and move forward in your life in a way that you want to, not that the therapist wants. In person-centered therapy, I could make a video on that too, because I was a person-centered therapist. It's about the client's goals and what the client wants. So when I think about this situation with me, I'm not going to go to therapy and be like, hello, I'm solely here because my neighbor wants me to be as least mental health out as possible, right? Least symptom showing. No one does that. No one goes to therapy because someone told them to get help. Oh, I mean, kids have to, and that's a separate conversation, and we can talk about that later. But it's not fair to just say oh, someone told me to get help. I'm going to go get help, because people aren't going to be really motivated to go to therapy unless they're ready, unless they want to go and they have goals that they want to work on their own. I think that when people say get help, it comes from a good place, but we need to understand what this help actually entails, because that's a really important piece of understanding what are clients doing in therapy? What do they go in there and talk about? What kind of, skills or approaches are utilized for them? Demystifying the therapeutic process is important. Even before, as a therapist, I wanted to know, why did my therapist just give me this DBT sheet? Or like, why did she perspective take on this thing? Like, what's that about? And when I understood the process better, I bought into it more, which buy into a therapeutic approach is also an important thing. But don't let anyone in this world make you feel like you're not doing therapy right because, you had an outburst in public, or like you had a panic attack when you went out one day, or you were shaking while you were driving because you have anxiety on the road. Like, the goal of therapy is to keep living your life and doing things that align with your values, even though it's hard, even though you still might have anxiety, even though you still might have panic attacks and a lot of debilitating, difficult things. And I'm not saying this to be stuck up. I live with these things myself. That's why I'm talking about it. I know from my lived experience that it's not easy. But if you're in therapy, you're amazing. If you're watching this because you're thinking about going to therapy, that's awesome. That's so cool. And I hope that you find someone who's a wonderful fit for you, who makes you feel really good about who you are so that you can do that work for yourself. And I hope that therapy makes you a better person. This is a separate tidbit and going to be a little bit of a rant now that I just brought that up. But I adore the writings of Devin Price. And I might have talked about him on this channel before. He's the author of Unmasking Autism and Laziness Does Not Exist. But I was very excited because a while ago, he came out with a point that I disagreed with. I agree with a lot of things he says. And I was happy to say, okay, finally I disagree with something. He wrote an article about that the goal of therapy is to not make you a better person, and that therapists just have you, focusing on yourself as an individual. I strongly disagree with that. I think that I've become such a better person because of therapy, and I think that I helped clients do that. I can't, ethically talk to them and bring them on, and they can prove it, but I really do think that I had a lot of clients who took accountability for hurting people in their relationships. I'm speaking vaguely because, of course, I can't speak about clients and break confidentiality, but I did hear a lot of reports of like, I repaired with my partner or my friend or my family member, and I took accountability and I apologized. And I think like my clients and I work together to learn like, what is an apology? Like, how do you take accountability and how do you repair and move forward? And like conflict resolution and like talking through relational dynamics is also usually a huge piece of therapy for people. Because if you struggle inside, mental health is a tough thing for you, of course, most likely you're going to struggle with your relationships too. So I think that that's another purpose of therapy for a lot of people. But again, some of these points you might be like, I don't want to go to therapy to be a better person. You don't have to. That doesn't have to be your goal. Whatever feels important to you. Maybe you want to learn skills to manage anxiety. Maybe you want to explore your identity more. Maybe you want to explore if you identify somewhere with LGBT or, with neurodivergence. Maybe you want to go that route. Like, there's just endless possibilities of what people can do. And the outside world doesn't get to dictate what is the goal and purpose of therapy and water it down to someone gets helped, they're pathologized as ill and sick, and they're having all these bad and wrong symptoms, and then they, do a bunch of stuff to mask and get better. Masking causes a lot of mental health problems, and it's actually really brave and vulnerable of someone to have said panic attack or meltdown in public. It doesn't mean they chose it, right? It's not like we choose to do those things by any means. I live with them myself, but it's better to have things come out than to hold them in. And so when people say to get help because their expectation is you're going to hold your feelings and difficulties inside, that's not going to help you. That's not going to help you feel better. It might convenience them, might reduce their stress of dealing with you, but it's not going to help you to deal with yourself. And it's not going to help you to form authentic and vulnerable and fulfilling relationships. And there's all a balance with that. This is a lot of rambling, but I just wanted to unpack this and make a video on the purpose of therapy. What is therapy really about? Because I feel like there's a lot of discrepancy around it. So I hope this video made sense and was really affirming and validating to you. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave them in the comment section below. I'd also love if you gave a like to this video. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I hope to put more videos out soon when I have some spoons, and I will catch you on the flip side. Bye all.